Latrice, and today's episode is going to be about disobedience. Now, we know in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22, he says that it's better to obey than to sacrifice. And for a long time, I was spending more time sacrificing myself, which was basically settling for things I didn't need to be settling for, just for the simple fact of I didn't want to, bother God since I had made mistakes and things like that. And I felt like I wasn't worthy to receive His grace. And so I realized, it doesn't matter, whether you think you're worthy or enough. You are called by God to be His child, so His plan and His purpose for you will stand as long as you're willing to turn away from your sin and be who He called you to be. Now, I know sometimes a lot of us will feel guilt and a lot of us will feel shame when we think about the things that we've done, but we have to remember that God is a gracious God and He didn't call you for nothing. His word will not return unto Him void. And the first time I ever just really noticed that I was being disobedient, I had moved back to Tennessee, and as soon as I got there, the Lord showed me a dream of me moving to Florida. I saw the palm tree and the Florida blue sign, and I was just kind of like, God, I don't want to go there. I just got here to Tennessee. I'm not going anywhere. That right there, that was the biggest mistake of my life, because I went through so much unnecessary sacrifice, all because I didn't want to listen. And I sacrificed so much money, so much time, so much energy in places I didn't need to be. And I just feel like, don't be like me. When God gives you instruction, hear it, do it, and wholeheartedly be glad you got the instruction. Because for a long time, I just wouldn't want to take heed to it because of the fact that I felt like I wasn't worthy enough because of the mistakes I had made. And because of the fact that I'm like, well, if nobody, I was just basically under the impression that nobody wanted me and that I was just kind of alone on earth again because I'm always making mistakes with people. And I started feeling like, well, if I'm making mistakes with people, I don't want to bother God and be like, hey, I still want your love, but yet be sitting out here sinning and, just not giving Him His time. And that was that sacrifice basically lasted about 5 years. Because in 2020, I ended up moving to Florida anyways. I was literally smoking one day. I believe it was my birthday. I was smoking outside, and he was like, you know you're supposed to be going to Florida, right? He was like, you should be going to Florida. And I was like, you know what, you are absolutely right. And I just kind of got up, left, and moved to Florida. But when I got there, I was not in the space to do what God asked me to do. Immediately when I got there, I started back drinking. I guess you could say self-harm, because I did harm myself a little bit after a job because someone was being incredibly rude for no reason. And I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know what this is, but I don't like it, and I don't know how to confront this person without acting a fool, so let me not do that, and let me just kind of, keep it to myself. I didn't, needless to say, I didn't last at that job. And after that, I realized that I was supposed to, just go back and be in His grace, but I still wanted to drink. And I realized that wasn't, that wasn't what He wanted for me. And after that, I decided that, I'm gonna try God again. So as we know, I first began this podcast back when I first decided to try God again, and that was last year, at the end of 2020. I basically decided that I was going to, be the person that he called me to be. So I pretty much just I stopped smoking, I stopped drinking because I was just kind of like, I can't do this anymore. Every time I'm trying to be around people, it always ends up terrible, and so I just kind of, I withdrew from everything. I went to a homeless shelter, and then I basically just kind of started my path to obedience. The first time I was disobedient was, which it was kind of weird that I was even disobedient about it because it wasn't even anything that big. I basically just needed to tell a relative a dream that I had of them, because for a long time I was just kind of like, what do I do? What do I talk to them about? Because I knew I didn't really want to talk to them about anything, because I knew the way they felt about me. They felt like I was the one out here doing wrong and stuff, and it was simply the fact that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just, I had to follow what God asked me to do. Too many people want to spend more time doing what they want to do and not what God asked them to do, and they'd rather be nosy and then don't realize that you lost all your time to give God, what you need to do. The tool, you have tools in you. God has placed tools in you, and then you just kind of let them linger because you don't want to call upon God to find out how to use them. And that's kind of where I was. And so last year I kind of tried to, I kind of tried to not tell her the dream, but everything in me was telling me to tell her the dream. And so I did. Of course, I got a lengthy response that was more or less saying that I was projecting onto her what was going on with me. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, I mean, I did my job. I was just supposed to make sure I told you. And so that was one of the first instances where I was being semi-disobedient, because I didn't tell her right away. I waited a few days, but it was eating me up inside to tell her. And it's just kind of like, what do I need to do, to get back in these people's good graces? But I realized I don't need to be in those people's good graces, because being obedient to God is what's going to help me and keep me persevering through this life. There have been times where I have been disobedient, and like after I got out of the shelter, I was supposed to be waiting for help, and I didn't want to wait, and I was, steadily using fear of not having money and using fear of not having a space to sleep in, determine what it is I was going, what it is my next move was going to be. He had already showed me that I was going to be okay. So it was just kind of like, in a way, that was being disobedient, because, well, not in a way, it was disobedient, because I didn't want to focus on him anymore. I wanted to be so focused on my bills and so focused on, the money that I had, and he doesn't need me to focus on any of that. He just needs me to focus on him, and he'll take care of the rest, because he will always guide me to what it is that I need to do. Because ever since this, since November the 1st of this year, when I got back up from my backsliding back in March of this year, he basically been like, okay, we can do this. You kind of, the gist. You just kind of have to get back into your groove of things. But this time, the tests of obedience were a lot harder. There were times where I would have to go be in the same place that I already was, and I didn't want to be there. Or rather, I was just like, usually I don't go to this place, so I won't go to this place. And there were also times where I wouldn't ask him which way to go, so then I'd go the wrong way, and all in turn, everything just turn into a whole bunch of mess because I didn't ask him where to go. And there have been times where I'll go to the wrong place that he wants me to go, and I'll immediately know. I'm just like, oh, well, I went to the wrong place. I can tell because X, Y, and Z, you know. And those are the little things you have to look out for when being disobedient. It's one thing to be disobedient, but it's another thing to be disobedient and not recognize you're being disobedient. I know for some it's harder than others because some of us don't seem to want to notice, but then there are those who want to be obedient and they're just having a hard time, catching God's instruction and making sure they follow it to the letter. Because that's kind of where I was within the last couple of weeks, because I literally, I needed to wash clothes before I went to a group meeting, and before I went in there, he was like, okay, put them in this wash machine. And I was just like, I usually put them in this wash machine, so I'm going to put them in this wash machine. So I did that. I went and put them in the wash machine I usually put them in, and lo and behold, what do you know? A whole bunch of mess popped off. The clothes were soaking wet, and I had to rewash them all over again. And I did not get refunded that money because the person that was supposed to come and refund the money was over an hour away. And since I go to the washer tier about early in the morning as I can, I just wasn't going to be able to wait for them because I had group meeting less than an hour from that time. So I immediately was just like, Lord, I'm sorry for being disobedient. I felt so bad. I felt so guilty. I felt so shameful. And I realized, like, okay, you were disobedient right here. We see that. Now what are you going to do? Because what the devil will try to do, he will try to keep you in a state of guilt and shame about your disobedience. And then you'll be like, well, I guess I'll continue in it because, I still feel guilty. No, that is a full stop no. Do not entertain it. That is the devil trying to get you to continue to be disobedient once you recognize that you've messed up. Because I was sitting there for a while, which was probably about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and I was just like, you know what, I already know the devil wants me to mull over this and overanalyze this disobedient spot that I was in, but I don't need to do that. What I need to make sure I do is not do the same thing again. And so I didn't. When I got done washing the clothes, then it was time to dry them. He's like, okay, so are you going to do what you usually do? I'm like, no. And sure enough, when I didn't do what I usually did, I was okay, and my clothes got dry the way they needed to get dry, and I was still on time for my group meeting. And I was just like, glory be to God, because I had called and made provisions and told them, like, hey, I'm probably going to be late because yada, yada, yada. And they were just like, oh, that's okay if you're late because you called ahead of time. A lot of times people will come up in there and they'll be late and they won't call ahead. I call ahead because I have no idea what's going to happen, and I'm one of those people that just likes to be really prepared most of the time. Even when I wasn't trying to follow God, I would always be really prepared. Like, even in all my drinking and smoking, I've never missed a bill. I've never been late on rent. I've never missed out on a meal. But all of those things God doesn't like, so it doesn't matter if I was able to maintain my standard of living and still do those things God didn't like. If he doesn't like them, I just don't need to do them. And I'm being disobedient to not be able to hear what he has for me to do. And that's the reason why I don't smoke and I don't drink, because it's just like, well, the calling that he has for you, it requires you to be sober. So I'm going to need for you to just recognize that this is bigger than you. And that's another thing. In being disobedient, you don't really recognize that your life is more than just about you. because you're a member of Christ. So you are a member of Christ's body, and you must be sober, you must be vigilant, and you must always be obedient, because all of us have to do one thing or the other for his will to be fulfilled. And we can't do it if, I'm over here messing up, because if I'm over here messing up, then you're going to be messing up as well. It's like what do I call it? What do I call it? I call it oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank, because it's something that I usually say in reference to that. Oh, what I say is, I'm like, she's not going to he or she is not going to make it because I'm not making it. And when I say that, I mean, like, they're not going to be able to come to Jesus because I'm not coming to Jesus. Because sometimes, people always say that. They're like, well, if everybody, is supposed to love God, then everybody knows who is supposed to be in the member of Christ. I say it's not always like that. Sometimes it takes you to be following God for someone to start following God. Because we're all a part of God's body, and we're here to pray for each other and be there for each other. So we can't be there for each other if I'm over here being disobedient, and then you still need to come to God. You still need to come to Jesus. Like, it's not gonna help anybody. It's not gonna help me. It's not gonna help the people that I need to bring to Jesus. It's just not gonna help. So when I did that, I was just kind of like, dang, the clothes, they got dry, and I praise God because they got dry. And I realized that, being disobedient can really cause you to sacrifice something really large. Now, mind you, I possibly could have only just sacrificed, I could have been sacrificing me not making that meeting, but instead I just sacrificed a little bit of time. God could have made it where I wasn't even able to, make it to the meeting at all, but I was able to make it to the meeting, and I'm so grateful that he allowed me to do that. There was another time I was disobedient. I was in prayer, and he had told me to do something in regards to going to a hotel. Now, I didn't do that because I was hesitating. I was worried that and again, it was about money. I was worried that if I spent this money, that something else was going to happen. As if something else was going to happen. It was probably the stupidest thing I've probably done. Well, that ain't the stupidest thing I've done all year, but it's one of the stupider times that I've been disobedient for no real reason other than the fact of fear. So I'm starting to, I've always been doing this, but I always pray and rebuke the spirit of fear and rebuke the spirit of hesitancy, because when you're following God's instruction, you have to follow it quickly, and you can't let it linger in your spirit. You got to do it right then and there, or whenever he tells you to do it, because he gave me a specific time to do it and everything, and I just kind of let it slide, and I was just like, I'll go back and do it later, and I believe I forgot about it. And then I just kind of just was like, oh, Lord, just save me a room for me. And you know what? But because I was disobedient, he didn't. But I was just like, that's fair. Because if I would have went on ahead and been obedient, I would not have had to deal with that. So I know it's hard to think about the things you've been disobedient with in life, but just think about a lot of those things where, God asked you to do something and you didn't do it. How do you think that made you feel later on when there was something else you really wanted, but, you couldn't have it? Not because of the disobedience, but because of the sacrifices you had to make when you decided not to be when you decided not to be obedient. Because that was basically what happened to me. Because I decided to be disobedient in not coming to Florida, everything is 10 times, I'm having to do everything God tells me to do now, but it's 10 times harder because we have to deal with all of these people are dying and there's people that are probably missed because of the fact that I didn't come here sooner enough. And there's probably things that I was supposed to do back then that would have been easier to do than they are now. And I basically missed opportunity. Well, I missed the opportunity of it being easier for me to get it done. Not to say that it's not going to get done now. It's just the fact that I have to work even harder. But I know that I'm willing to work hard. I just realized one thing, that I'm not going to be working as hard for these companies as I am going to be working hard for God. And that's what I want you all to remember as well. Like, yes, we have to work, but if you're not being obedient to the will of God and obeying God, a lot of stuff is just going to be halfway fruitful, and it's not going to be as God intended it to be. So I say that to say obedience is better than sacrifice. When God calls you, please do as you are told. And if you ever have questions, just start asking right away. He'll answer right away. He doesn't mind. And just know that you're going to be okay, because even Peter told, who was those people he told? He told them it is better to obey God than to obey man. And it's true, because sometimes people will try to get you to do something and you're just kind of like, now I would never do that because God would not allow me to do that. Or you already know God told you not to do it, and then they tell you to do it. Don't ever feel like you can't follow God because so-and-so told you not to do something. Always choose God instructions over man's instructions, because the help of man is vain. So always choose God instructions over man's.